Hey guys, my name is Bogi and I draw things, and in this video I'm going to show you start to finish how I created this image. A superhero comic book style caricature of my friend Ricky, his girlfriend Stephanie, and their cat Jasmine. Jasmine. Just me? I don't know, not a cat person. So some time ago I had set up this Patreon page where I upload my artwork and all of my short stories, and I had forgotten about it until my friend Ricky was nice enough to support me there. And not only that, but choose the highest tier where you get to get a personalized caricature drawn by me. And since he's a good friend of mine, I decided how about I throw in also his girlfriend and their cat, and spend many nights, sleepless nights, doing that. So I'm gonna use a mix of physical drawing on paper with digital coloring, which is something that is actually a common mix in the comic book style of work. For the paper, I have this thing here, Daler Brownie A3. Not the best because it's not glossy and it has a little bit of a yellowish tint, but it'll do the trick. Then I have a what else? Pencil and kneaded eraser, pencil HB, but you can go with H or double H, whatever. Some people prefer it harder. For the inking part, I have the Micron Fineliners 005 and 01. I have Fudenosuke soft and hard brush for some varied line weight. I have what else? Just a regular brush for bigger areas or for splattering and ink. I go with some water resistant ink just in case I want to go over with some actual paint. Then I have for whiteout, I have Uniposca whiteout. I have this old gym membership card for splatter and for the swag, and then I have this ruler. I think that's about it. And then for the digital part, I use this pen tablet. It's Sans Labs because I'm poor, and I use Photoshop. So that's about it. Alright, I start first with a thumbnail here, which is a tiny sketch of what I'm going to do, experimenting with some poses, validating some ideas. The thing about drawing on paper is, it's paper, so you're going to make mistakes, you're going to make corrections, as you see here me erasing over and over. And there's only a finite amount of time you can do this before damaging the paper. And also, if you're going to scan it like I do and color it digitally, that also matters, because then you're going to have leftover stuff on the paper you need to clean up, and my paper is always dirty at the end. So that's why a thumbnail works. And also, you can see me here when I'm sketching out with a pencil, I'm trying to keep the lines loose. I don't press too hard with the pencil. This way I also have some flexibility within that thicker pencil line to wiggle around until I finally commit with the ink. So now you see me struggle here to define the exact pose of the cat, insisting that I show that it's a male cat, let's put it this way. But now I think I'm done with the bigger parts, and you can see me always go from a bigger shape towards a smaller shape, from a bigger detail towards a smaller one, doing Ricky's face based on the reference, and then Steph's. Obviously always a nerve-wracking thing to do a girl's face, especially when you need to preserve their likeness. And then here I think I'm about ready to move into the next step. I start inking. I start with the thinnest 005 just in case I need to correct something with the whiteout, and especially for those hairs of Ricky. You can see me here not doing a photorealistic version of the hair, because what I'm doing is more of a stylistic decision based on the comic book style. I'm thinking of the hair not as individual strains but as shapes. That's gonna help me out when I color it, or when I hit it with the light rather. And then once I define all of these shapes, I will proceed to the next step. You notice one thing, that when I'm not certain about something, I don't hesitate to go back to the pencil. You see me do this here, and this is because now I'm looking for a light source. Now I'm just checking, how do I light this piece? And once I figure this out, I can actually start laying out the thick dark cast and core shadows. And I figured it out, and the decision is I will use the top left corner as the sort of light source for the bigger light, and I'll have a smaller light source sort of from the bottom, or maybe from the left hand of Ricky with the lightning effect that will cast this additional rim light and I will stick to this through most of this piece. And in fact, this will also determine kind of the balance of the entire piece and the composition. You can see here, for example, with the cast shadow I'm using, the shadow that the cat casts over these rocks, the bottom right corner will be sort of the darkest area in this image, and the top left corner will be the lightest, to also have some sort of a balance and flow to the entire piece and have a composition. And here, I'm not sticking to a particular workflow. I'm switching between rendering and different areas just to keep myself interested, and because I'm taking breaks. But with the cat, because it's a black cat, I decide to render it from dark to light in a way that you would probably see in a bad photo. For example, if you take a photo and overexpose it, the area of the highlights is going to be kind of burned out. And so you can see that happening here, where the light hits the cat, it's the hair, it becomes invisible, and you see the white of the paper, which is the ultimate highlight here. So, you know, historically, the way that this kind of art evolved, comic book art, it started just on white paper with black ink. So the way artists used to create values was through cross-hatching, through throwing these lines that will define this sort of area of gray. When you squint your eyes or see it from a distance, it kind of looks gray. And the way I do this here is in two ways. Either I drew it through the texture. When I render, for example, the cat, I use the hair of the cat, or the material that is the object is made of for this. Or I use just regular cross-hatching, which is, you know, I use those lines that you see that I throw, for example, on Ricky's body here. And the rule is this: I go from dark to light, from the darkest towards the light, and where these lines kind of disappear. And the main rule here to observe is just to make sure that these lines follow the shape of the object. For example, if you think about it, let's say if you look at his shoulder as a globe, then these lines would be the what are those lines called on the Earth's globe? The meridians, and you know, they follow the shape. Otherwise, you run the risk of flattening that image, and you don't want to do that. You want it to pop. You want to make it two-dimensional, sort of. So this is what I continue doing here through his body, and when I switch between the different kind of materials, for example, his gloves, I render slightly differently because I think of it as a kind of a thicker material, and I do the same, and you'll see more examples of this when I go to Steph's body. But yeah, another thing is you'll notice that the male figure is way over rendered, and the female will be much less rendered, and this is kind of normal. Another thing which you want to really watch out when doing females is not to over render, because then it kind of looks, the object looks worn off or older when you do that. And it's okay for guys, it kind of looks grumpy and gritty, but you want to be careful with the girls. Now here with the background of these clouds, I don't throw in too much detail. I love doing clouds, but I don't want to do that because really I want to be mindful of where the attention of the viewer is. And if there's too much detail in the clouds, you're going to look at them and it's going to be just too tiresome for your eyes. So I want to kind of focus you on the figures and create this balanced look. So here on Steph, you can see I'm not doing too much shadowing. I'm going to do a lot of the value building in the coloring phase. You're going to see me do that. I'm just establishing some basic things, and here you see that she has a lot more different textures. So for example, there's this metal part on her shoulders and the left arm. There's those leather straps. They're textured, and I render them towards the light based on the texture of the object, as opposed to what you saw me do on Ricky, where it's just a cross hatching. So it's just, you know, to also alternate between these modes and signify the change in materials. And here also very careful with the face not to over render it. And the hair, she has a little bit of darker hair, I think, so that's why I went with sort of the way I would approach it, black hair. All right, now we go ahead with the digital part of things. Unfortunately, I don't have a big scanner to scan an A3 piece, so I just took a long exposure photo with my DSLR camera of the drawing and imported it into Lightroom to make some adjustments and prepare it for Photoshop. So what I do is I just decrease the saturation to make it black and white. I boost the whites, I decrease the blacks, I add some texture for contrast. That's about it. And then I import it into Photoshop and I do the rest there. In Photoshop, by the way, you can still clean it up. There's a lot of debris here from my penciling, but I was honestly too lazy to do that, so I left it as it is, and I think it adds a little bit of like realistic feel to it that, you know, I actually did it with my hands. But anyway, you can remove it if you want. So what I do here is I follow a pretty well-established workflow that is well described by the people that know what they're doing. So as we're looking through this time lapse, I will walk you through the process and what you see on the right hand side in the layers and explain that. So the first thing is I separated the original image into two layers. One is the lower layer, which is the white background, the paper, and one is the layer with the inks. The inks I achieved by going, and there's different ways, but what I did was I went into the channel part, and then I control clicked on RGB. This is over the original image. Then I inverse selected that, and I ended up with a selection over all of the inks or the black parts of the image. I bucket tooled that with black, and I placed that in a new layer. And in that layer, which is very important, is I lock the transparency of the pixels. This is something I do also for all the color layers. And that's important because that allows you to then paint just over that area if I want to do that, and not affect all the surrounding area, right? So I have these two basic layers, and every other layer is in between the inks and the bottom paper layer. So the second layer is something you see here is called flats. So flatting is the process of making selections of the different areas in the image which have one uniform base color, right? So for example, the cat or the head of the cat is one basic color, and then it has some detail over that color, right? So the way you do this is, in my case, I use the lasso tool. I make selections and I then bucket tool them with different colors. It doesn't really matter what the colors are at this point. All that matters is that they're different colors, which means that I can use the magic wand to make selections and then use other layers to then do the actual coloring. So but still, I'm trying to be mindful of the end colors, and I sort of already experiment with some colors that kind of make sense just to save some time afterwards. Now, this is something that's very time consuming, and in fact, in the industry, there's often flatters. There are people that just do that. They just do the selection so that the colorist can then continue with the rest of the more artistic part of the job. Anyways, the next thing I do is I copy paste the flats into a new layer called colors. Now at that point, I try to establish what are the actual end colors. You might notice that I'm actually picking up some of the colors from the reference photos, especially for the skin, for the hair, things like that. I am experimenting with hue, saturation. I'm using the color picker to pick those colors. There's some color theory, but you know, I'm just using what looks good. I'm not educated enough to know better. And you might wonder why you're doing this in a separate layer. Well, the reason is because then I'm going to make additional adjustments and fine-tuning. And I still want to preserve the flat layer so that, for example, I can still select the entire cat and make a macro adjustment on it. And then I can select and do the micro adjustments on the color layers. So the next step is I make selections from the color layer with the magic wand. I create new layers. I copy-paste those selections there. And I lock the transparency of those selections, which is, by the way, something you can streamline by creating an action in Photoshop, which is when you code a specific sequence of events just to make it faster. I haven't done this, but you know, it's something that's pretty easy to do. When I do that, then I switch into my actual coloring here, and I try to add the details. And for that, I am pretty well informed by the underlying photo. I know already from the cross-hatching and all the other stuff where my light sources are, and I try to stick to those. And I experimented a little bit in this piece, but finally I settled on a very kind of lazy and easy approach, which is I have the main color already in the colors layer. Now what I do is I just switch between different blending modes to establish the highlights and the shadows. So for shadows I use multiply, and for highlights I use screen mode. And that's it. And I have a touch sensitive pen, so depending on how strongly I press, I get the different effect. If I do several strokes, it gets lighter or darker accordingly. And I use the lasso tool sometimes for bigger selections, or for smaller selections I go straight with the brush, and I use a kind of a soft rounded brush for most of it. And now one more thing I did kind of earlier on, but you can do it also at the end, is I applied a separate layer on top of that, which is a color wash. So that's a layer where I selected a color. A color is up to you. And I changed the blending mode of that layer to color, and then I decreased the opacity. What that does is it applies an overall hue over the image. So that kind of connects all the colors and makes it more realistic. They don't look just some flashy colors taken out of context, but it looks like this piece is set in an environment. What I mean by that is, for example, if you take a photo of a place in your city in different times of the day, or in different seasons, you will notice that because of the light source, because of the angle of the sun, the air, and so on, the overall hue of the image is different. So you can have a different image, let's say if you take a photo in the desert, or on an alien planet, or underwater. So in here I'm going with this orange kind of yellowish tint, and this is the color wash. It kind of ties up all the colors, and it makes it look a little bit tied up together. And besides that, I just do a couple of small other tricks. I have one layer which is black, and the blending mode is set to screen. And then with a brush with also a screen blending mode, I make these kind of lighting effects. So on this device that the girl has on the left arm, it glows thanks to that effect. Same for Ricky's left arm. Besides that, I do a color hold only on this device on the left hand, and that is, I make a selection of the ink layer, I copy paste it into a new layer, and I change the color of the inks from black to the color of this golden device. And I also make a selection of Ricky's eyes, and I apply a outer glow effect on it. And I think I used color dodge to achieve this kind of red thing. And that's basically all of it. And if you like any of that, I would highly recommend watching other channels. I can recommend some at the end. All right, I hope you guys enjoy that. And if you like this sort of content, I can recommend a few additional channels of some real pros. You can go check out David Finch on YouTube. If you're interested in the penciling and inking traditionally part. He is throwing some tutorials and has live streams every Monday. For the coloring part, I can recommend Color with Kurt, a great channel with a lot of tutorials on Photoshop, color theory, clip studio, and things like that. And if you like that video, let me know in the comments. Feel free to subscribe, and see you next time.